Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everybody. First of all, since it's the first time I take the microphone, I'd like to thank our local host, MIC, for their excellent organization of this event and their hospitality. The reception last night, I learned that the Kyoto Protocol has a different meaning. It means opening a barrel of sake. It's not what we thought. And of course, I'd also like to thank the Telecom Standardization Bureau of the ITU, Mr. Malcolm Johnson's team, for their excellent organization of this event. There's a saying we have in English, someone who does the heavy lifting, and the TSB has done the heavy lifting inside the ITU for this event. And so thank them very, very much for their excellent organization, along with MIC and the ITU Association of Japan. Of course, this is a great place to kick off a discussion of ICTs and the environment. Japan is, of course, a world leader in ICTs. It's a leader in broadband deployment. It's a leader in fiber to the home deployments. I remember most of the rest of the world looks on with envy for the prices. You can get 100 megabits or a gigabit to your house or something like that in Japan. And of course, they're also a leader in mobile internet technologies. Most of access to the internet in Japan is through mobile. So not only are they a leader in ICTs, but they're also a leader in dealing with climate change and the environment. Of course, Japan is a country that is subject to cyclones and tsunamis and flooding and stuff like that, and so they're a leader in adaptation to these climate challenges. And for example, just to give an example of how that can make an impact by being a leader there, Japan is, for example, much more subject to flooding and cyclones than the Philippines. And between 2000 and 2004, there were about 700 deaths in the Philippines from flooding and cyclones, while in Japan there was only about 66. So these can make being prepared can make a huge difference to adaptation and mitigation to climate change. So I'm going to take a little bit different perspective than the previous presentations, talk about looking at things a little bit from a development perspective. And if I get this mouse to work, did I press the right button? Which button you press? The middle one? Left button. There it goes. Okay. So rough agenda there. First, I'll give a little bit of definitions. What are ICTs and what is e-environment and so on? And I'm going to talk about a new draft study that we have underway. We've put out for comments for a draft. Give some background and what were some of the intentions of this study, and talks about why environmental issues are growing in importance, some of the trends in ICTs for the environment, and the relationship of the environment to sustainable development and some of the implications, very serious implications for developing countries out there, and what are some of the opportunities here for the ITU to try and go forth and do good things in this area. So ICTs, well, it's interesting, it's quite difficult to find a good definition of ICTs. That's a challenge. I think maybe the ITU will undertake one day. Even in the World Summit on the Information Society text, which references the term ICTs everywhere, it's never defined anywhere. And so I actually went out and tried to do a lot of research, and I couldn't find a good definition of ICT. So as normal, you define a term for the uses of this report. So basically, it's an umbrella term encompassing what we think it should mean, radio, television, mobile phones, computer hardware and software, application software, et cetera. Something like that. Now, with regard to, I'm obviously not pressing this button. There it is. E-environment, the WSIS texts actually do give a definition of e-environment, and it gives these three sort of definitions, and I'm not quite sure that covers the entire range of what e-environment should mean, but the first one, of course, is what we're mostly talking about here, using ICTs for environmental protection, sustainable use of natural resources. The word sustainable is very important here. Action for sustainable production, consumption, and disposal and recycling of hardware and components used in ICTs. And then, of course, establishment of monitoring systems using ICTs to forecast and monitor natural and man-made disasters, and certainly climate change. The IPCC report referred to climate change as the largest man-made disaster, perhaps. You have to press twice. It's a double-click button mouse. Some backgrounds. The authors of this report are, main author is Richard LaBelle, a consultant in Canada who has a background in this area, and Tony Vetter from Nortel, and Tony Vetter from the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and Ralph Rotschat from Nortel. Well, we started off and we thought we were just going to do like a 40 or 50 page small report, and it's now around 200 pages. That's recto verso, and it still has a ways to go. But we hope to finalize it and release it at the second of these ICT and Climate Change Symposium, which will take place in June in London. So you can go to that web address and download a copy if you'd like to, and send us comments on it. The rationale for this study, of course, proof that all good ideas start in Kyoto. The actual first resolution, as was mentioned, was Resolution 35, 2 years after the Earth Summit in 1992. And that was passed here in Kyoto. That's sort of our original mandate in that area. But of course, I work for the development sector, and our task is to go out and assist developing countries implement ICT applications, and that includes the environment. And of course, we're a co-facilitator of what's called WSIS Action Line C7, which is on e-environment. And on the 21st of May in Geneva, there'll be a facilitation meeting on that topic. So the objectives of the report, we basically had three objectives: to better understand the importance and impact of ICTs as tools for dealing with and environmental issues, and in particular climate change; to better understand the interrelationship of the environment with sustainable development; and to better understand how we should approach the environment opportunities, including climate change in the ITU. So it was fortuitous that we started working on this report. We sort of commissioned it back in August, and since August there's been a tremendous growth in public interest in this topic, wide media attention, and a lot of that came with the publication of the Climate Change 2000, the fourth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC as it's more commonly known. And this presented fairly definitive evidence that climate change is real, and we need to take action. And of course, there was the UN Climate Change Conference. Some of my colleagues from the ITU participated in that conference in Bali. And of course, the IPCC and Al Gore, who's been a big proponent of promoting that, received the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to disseminate knowledge about climate change. And I think, did I go back some? No, that's okay. And of course, the ITU report makes reference to the IPCC report, which came out during our preparation of the phenomena linked with climate change, the growing linkage between climate change and disasters, the growing human populations in environmentally sensitive areas, etc. And the IPCC report is quite damning, as we would say. Its warming of climate systems is unequivocal from observation of increases in global average air and ocean temperatures. And I think the next slide really shows this. And this is an area where ICTs have been tremendously important in determining in a rigorous way that climate change is real and here. And you see these graphs showing it in all continents going up. Now, why have we been able to do that? Well, lots of advances, of course, in ICTs. The primary thing has been advanced climate change modeling has led to much more predictive climate models, so we can make predictions in various scenarios running out over the next 50, 100 years, and then look at, for example, what impact that would have on biodiversity and so on. And if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you can sort of understand why we can be much more predictive. In the 1990s, you could only measure so many layers of the atmosphere and so many layers of the oceans and so on. And in the present day, we can do a lot more, so we can produce much more sophisticated models, include lots more types of data. The weather is an incredibly complex, the atmosphere is a very complex thing to model. And then we have things like distributed applications now using grid software. And there's this, in fact, things about 100,000 volunteers are part of climateprediction.net, a grid network out there. But you can see, of course, that most of the dots there on that map on the left are still concentrated very much in the developed countries. Developing countries still have very, very limited access to ICTs. So the general overall trends are that, we've got lots of digital data produced and available online. There's a lot more to put online, many stuff in archives and libraries and so on that go back many, many years. Lots of processing power out there, and we can make better understanding of the environment. And this, of course, supports environment research and decision making. And so very much using ICTs is really, really important for us to devising appropriate climate change adaptation and mitigation responses. So there's a study from 2007, Ian Thomas, which is often cited as sort of a simple view, the three-order effects of ICT. So a first order is what, that ICTs can have a negative effect. They use energy, they use resources, they contribute to the global warming, but not very much, as the speaker from WEF said yesterday. Are we spending 98% of our time worrying about 2% of the problem? The second order, of course, are what many of us see as opportunities, the efficiency gains from ICTs, telecommuting, dematerialization, supply chain and production efficiency, warehousing, infrastructure efficiency, smart buildings, et cetera, et cetera. The third order is sort of what's called behavioral adaptation. Here, a lot more research is needed. This is sort of more the long-term changes in consumer and business behavior. And often, more efficiency can lead to, increased usage. When we all were able to have cheap laser printers in our offices, perhaps that created more printing, like that. So sometimes it can be the opposite effect when you increase efficiency. But we've sort of taken a little bit more complex view. That's supposed to be a map of the Earth down below. It didn't come out. The report examines ICT use in 6 areas of environmental action. And that starts with sort of observation, very, very important for research into climate change, analysis, planning, management, protection, mitigation, adaptation, and capacity building, like there. And you've seen there's been a lot of capacity building in the last 6 months, great public awareness, lots of education. My secretary is talking to me all the time, oh, Mr. Shaw, you must go out and do more on climate change. So it's become very, very much in the public eye. And there's a lot of applications out there. Actually, the annex to this report lists a very long table of ICT applications out there that are available on the internet and so on. So a lot of great work that's been done. Once more, 3 times. So talk a little bit about the relationship of e-environment, the history of e-environment and sustainable development. Of course, when the UN was created, environmental concerns weren't really on the international policy agenda at all. But with evidence of environmental deterioration, the UN has become probably the leading proponent for action on environmental issues and sustainable development. Following the UN conference in Stockholm on human environment, the UNEP, or United Nations Environment Program, was established as sort of the main environmental body in the UN. And in the post-Stockholm years, mounting concern led the General Assembly to convene the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1983. And that produced a report, the Brundtland Report, and that was really the catalyst for the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio. Now, lots of things have changed since then. 4 times. Maybe it keeps going up as you... Today, in the international agreement area, there's over 900 multilateral and 1,500 bilateral agreements in the environmental area. There's a very nice project at the University of Oregon, down that link at the bottom, which sort of catalogs all these. And of course, we know about the most popular ones we've heard about. The UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, the Convention on Biological Diversity, Convention on Law of the Sea, Montreal Protocol, and the depletion of the ozone, and so on. Now, what are the main implications for developing countries? Well, there's basically 2 ways to deal with climate change. That's a process of adaptation to its impact, for example, as Japan has done with cyclones and tsunamis and flooding. And there's also by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is called mitigation, and that reduces the rate and the magnitude of climate change. But of course, the ability of countries to adapt and mitigate is very much dependent upon their socioeconomic and environmental circumstances and the availability that they have of ICTs. So many countries have very, very limited capacity. They don't have much access to the internet, particularly in places like Africa, so on. They have very limited human capacity to actually analyze and interpret climate data. They have limited capacity to integrate that data into decision making and policy making. And they actually have very limited capacity to undertake adaptation and mitigation. So, and the impact on developing countries is particularly severe. I'd recommend looking at, there's a very good report that sort of accompanies the fourth assessment report from the IPCC. And they kind of look at the science behind things, and they make some projections what's likely to happen. By 2020, that's not very far off, between 75 and 250 million people in Africa are projected to be exposed to increased water stress. Oh, sorry, this is an old version of the slide here, I see. In areas like, I had an updated version of this which had data for other countries. But for example, in the large mega delta regions in Asia, there's expected to be much more increases in flooding and so on. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the melting of the glaciers, it means that there's going to be a lot less availability of water for human consumption and for agriculture. And we're starting to see some of these things already take place. For example, I just pulled up a couple of news articles in the last few days. In Bangladesh, Bangladesh faces climate change nightmares, headline in the BBC the other day. And they need $4 billion to build embankment cyclone shelters. Bangladesh is particularly subject to flooding and so on. So huge impact there. And of course, this is going to have massive impacts on the whole food production chain, and this is starting to take place. And you probably saw in the press in the last few days about riots in various countries, lack of food. So huge political and social problems. So what are some of the opportunities for the ITU? Well, I think we need to do a lot about awareness promotion about how ICTs can be very important for environmental decision making and action. And we need to get the decision makers on board. There still is a lack of political awareness of how serious these issues are out there. I mean, reading through the IPCC reports are actually quite chilling. We need to strengthen the capacity of developing countries to use ICTs for sustainable development. And there we should try and work in some of the existing frameworks like the OECD Development Advisory Committees, Poverty Reduction Strategy papers process, which is necessary for funding in the IMF and World Bank, working with UNEP and its World Conservation Monitoring Center, the Group for Earth Observations, which is an NGO, so on. And of course, we can always strengthen our activities in disaster communications, which is a key area of activity in the ITUT and also in the development sector. And one of the things we've thought about doing as a practical step is really trying to develop sort of a national planning framework and toolkit for integrating e-environment into national ICT strategy planning. And that might look like something like this. That sort of framework would be sort of an assessment of the current situation, consultation, awareness promotion, getting a vision statement, goals, where you want to go, developing the strategy, action plan, and having some real performance indicators, results-based management, and the indicators that come out of the poverty reduction strategy papers process, which is necessary for IMF and World Bank funding, monitoring and evaluation. So the next steps, we've circulated this draft report. We need to improve it a lot, refine it. I think we should start beginning the process of looking at developing this sort of e-environment toolkit, sort of a collection of best practices to assist developing countries. And eventually, as we get that going, undertake with some of the partners, and in the annexes presentation online, you'll see a list of, there's quite a few actors out there, undertake some pilot projects with countries. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.